Okay, in today's lesson, we'll be discussing the exclusionary rule and some of the exceptions that come along with that rule. First, to start off talking about the exclusionary rule, we'll talk about the definition of it, which the definition of the exclusionary rule is an understanding based on a U.S. Supreme Court proceeding that incriminating information must be seized according to the Constitution and the specifications of the due process, or it will not be allowed as evidence in the criminal court. Basically, what this means is if you're going to take evidence of a crime that you would like to admit in court as a piece of the crime used against the suspect, it's going to have to be taken in all accordance of the Constitution. The case is referring to how the whole groundwork to the exclusionary rule started was in 1914 with Weeks versus the U.S. A little background on the case. Mr. Weeks was arrested for suspicion of selling lottery tickets through the mail, which was illegal. The feds placed him under arrest and searched his house with no search warrant, which at the time was acceptable and a common practice, which nowadays we know that is unacceptable. But they seized evidence that proved he was selling lottery tickets through the mail illegally, and also they took more evidence that went along with that crime. However, they did also take some personal items from Mr. Weeks that had nothing to do with the crime, which is, as we know, unacceptable. His attorney asked for the personal items to be returned, and they were returned to him. However, he was still sentenced to jail for the crime that he was originally arrested for. Fast forward, after he appealed it, the case was then thrown out, and all charges dropped, and the items were returned to him because they won the appeal because of the exclusionary rule to the evidence that was found. It was not admissible because the constitutional rights were violated, they weren't followed, and therefore the evidence could not be used in court. An exclusionary rule was put in place to have some control over police as to what they were seizing and how they were seizing those items. A good example of this nowadays would be if you arrest a heroin dealer for trafficking heroin. You do a search warrant on his house, you take the heroin, the drugs, the money, the paraphernalia, the car that was used to transport the drugs. Then for some reason, officer sees something in the house that he thought was cool. He takes it, puts it in evidence. Therefore, everything is now thrown out because you took something that doesn't match the constitutional rights. Who the drug dealer still has those rights, and you then took those illegally. And that is a little bit about the exclusionary rule.